penalize the ones that come on time. But we have the unfortunate situation that lunch was just served. So everybody is crowding in, standing in lines for lunch at the moment. But thank you to those that sacrificed your meals, or maybe you ate before and you came here. We'll get going. We'll start the conversation, and as people come in, they can join the conversation. My name is Kevin Govender. I'm the director of the International Astronomical Union's Office of Astronomy for Development, and we have a really cool panel here today. And we said, you know, this sort of topic, it's something that we wanted to push ourselves to think about what the future will look like. And it's a hard thing to imagine the future. There's so many uncertainties in the future, but we're lucky to have some very wise people who will be able to help us reflect on the future, but also to reflect on what role science will play in that future. So you know where this comes from, and maybe I should mention I was having a chat with some of the guys from DSTI, and you know, Dan was saying, like, we're celebrating these occasions, 10 years of Science Forum. We recently celebrated 20 years of SALT, the Southern African Large Telescope. We celebrated 20 years of the bursary program of the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory. There's all these big milestones, but what is it that's going to happen in 20 years' time that we will be celebrating? Have we now put things in place, or do we have big ideas and big ambitions now that we are driving for the next 20 years? So we wanted to sort of ask ourselves, you know, what does the future hold, and what should we be thinking about now? We're all familiar with you know, massive changes that's happening when it comes to climate, when it comes to global geopolitics, with AI and all the conversations around that. We've seen Gen Z protests, or it's been called Gen Z protests, that have overthrown some governments in the world. So what is it that we should be thinking about, and especially in terms of the role that science will play? So the minister said in the opening yesterday that science is not inherently good. It's the people that do science to decide what to do with that science. But he also said that the struggle for scientific knowledge must also be a struggle for social justice. Now, how did those sort of sentiments define our future? And we as the science community, what are we going to do to shape that future? So I want you guys to also think about, you know, what are your worries about the future? What is it that that you would like to hear? Our panel has, you know, between them so much wisdom and knowledge, and it's amazing, like such young people that have so much wisdom, but they'll be able to chat with you. We want this to be a conversation. We want this to be something where, you know, you also participate. So yeah, let's take a ride into the future. Our first panelist that I want to introduce is Prof. Heidi Heckman. She's the chair in Science Futures with CREST. CREST is the Center for Research on Evaluation, Science and Technology at the University of Stellenbosch. But some of you might know Heidi because she was previously the Director of Future Africa at the University of Pretoria and the founding CEO of the International Science Council. So, Heidi.
May I stand there?
You can stand, you can...
I like standing.
Yeah, go for it. So
Sorry.
Heidi has this cool job of thinking about the future. So Heidi, you take us on a journey. What will the future look like?
Should I use the mic?
Oh, you can use it.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Afternoon, everyone. So the cool thing about thinking about the future is that no one can predict it, no one owns it. So it's completely, you can't, there are no wrong answers about the future. So what I wanted to do today is perhaps set the scene for this conversation about the future, just by taking stock of the current contemporary global context for science and society, looking at some of the ways in which we are responding and some of the critiques that raises, I think, about our ability to anticipate novel futures. So I want to be a little bit provocative. Mine is a bit of a gloom and doom story, but I hope that it provokes an interesting conversation.
That's what we're here for.
So, let me just get this going. So, I want to start in 2015, which really was both, I think, for global societies, but also for global science, an incredible moment in time, a moment of real optimism. The 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda 2030, adopted by all members of the UN, was actually, and this is not my wording, it was called a vision for a new world order. A common framework, something that is universal, indivisible, so all our concerns about complexity were built into that, and really pulling together global collaboration around a common purpose. In other words, these global challenges and shared values, the value of leave no one behind. So huge optimism, and I think if you look at the work of international bodies like the International Science Council at a global level, but you look at any level of the global science system, regional and national, I think it's true to say that the SDG framework provided a very, very powerful framing for mobilizing the global science ecosystem. You see this at institutional level with universities, including Pretoria and Cape Town, came out with strategies for the SDGs. They report on how they're doing on implementing or helping to implement the SDGs. There's a new higher education ranking for the SDGs. Funders got together. The funding consortia like the Belmont Forum rallied around the notion of SDGs. We managed to get talking to other types of funders because the SDGs provided a common framing. So you see it in the funding agendas, you see it in national policy agendas for science. So huge mobilization of the science system in all parts of the world. And at the same time, within the UN, in the multilateral space, it gave science a new mandate, a new visibility. So instead of the International Science Council being allowed to speak for 1 minute at a UN event, the UN itself set up all sorts of new mechanisms for science to engage. So the technology facilitation mechanism with its 10-member group, advisory group, an annual STI forum, which happens just before the high-level political forum, where governments report back on their progress in achieving the SDGs, etc., etc. You see new advisory boards to the UN Secretary General. All of this was kind of Agenda 2030, if not inspired, mobilized. But we know from lots of evidence that we've been pretty useless at achieving the SDGs across the world. And the UN has a group of 15 international scientists who every 3 or 4 years publish the Global Sustainable Development Report. Their latest one, which is called Times of Crisis, Times of Change, really the message is very, very clear. Unless we do something very radical and transformative, we are facing major crises. the progress in achieving SDGs across the board. I think there are 2 or 3 that are perhaps an exception. You know, and with the pandemic, of course, the progress is reversed. So we're in serious trouble. We know this now from of course, it's not just the SDGs. We're looking at the broader post-2015 development agenda. So we know this from the Paris Climate Agreement. I mean, look at the outcomes of the recent COP, right? So, quite a serious situation. And now what you see, and it's in every presentation on this topic, is the poly crisis, the world in poly crisis. And typically the poly crisis, and I'm guilty of this myself, we just come up with a list of all the threats to humanity and the planet, right? And it's all those global challenges that are captured in the SDGs, from climate to food insecurity, etc., to new wars. And I think underlying those new wars, a fraying of the global arms control regime, so new nuclear threats facing us, major geopolitical disruptions, AI and other emerging technologies that, you know, have both the power to or positive impacts potentially, but also yield new threats for humanity. The failures of multilateralism, where we bemoan the ability of world governments to act collectively, mis and disinformation, and other threats to scientific understanding and interpretation. In fact, rather than a listing like that, I'm currently reading Luke Kemp's book called The History and Future of Societal Collapse, the Global Goliath. And what he really shows is that embedded in this poly-crisis are some core vulnerabilities that you see throughout the history of societies collapsing, and actually makes the point, which is worth reminding ourselves, that all societies at some point collapse, whether it takes 100 years or 3,000 years. And some of those, the critical vulnerabilities are inequalities in society, or what he calls hierarchies of dominance hierarchies. And with inequality and other vulnerabilities in society, when you have these external shocks like climate change or new wars, that is the recipe for societal collapse. So it is a doom and gloom story. I think we do have to take this very seriously. In last week's Guardian, George Monbiot wrote about the epistemic crisis, which I think is also a much better way of saying, you know, threats to science due to mis and disinformation. But really what he calls, particularly by the social media and by tech conglomerates, taking hostage of knowledge. So that this is a crisis in how scientific knowledge is produced, shared and trusted. So that's the reality we face 10 years after our New World Order optimism. And so the Secretary General always calls for course corrections, but what we also see in today's world are what one could call course incorrections. So just a few, we see the rise of populism and resurgent nationalism now already for a good decade. And with that, in terms of science, we see concerns about research security, whereas we talk about open science, shared data, shared knowledge, that space is being closed down. We see a remilitarization of the global security paradigm. So where we got to a point where global security was seen in a much more comprehensive and inclusive way, to include things like climate change, human well-being. Now it is all about militarization again. With that, we've also seen a reduced space for diplomacy itself. That includes science diplomacy, scientific collaborations. And of course, in science diplomacy, what we see is now the admission on the one hand, but also the rise of what is being called transactional diplomacy. So where science is seen as a transactional leverage point. Not something for the global public good, which we must share freely, but something we can trade for direct national interest. So these are all pretty serious realities. If you look at how the global science system is responding, there are two examples for me that stick out. And I think this just smacks of business as usual responses. And the fact that they are business as usual makes this conversation about the future so important. The one is the UN Summit for the Future last year, where if you look at the outcome document, it's all about recommitting to international collaboration, recommitting to achieving the SDGs. And I don't know about you, but I think, okay, really? I mean, we've tried now for 10 years. We've responded, we've put so much emphasis on, and that's the best we can do after the failure to act. All we can say is we recommit. And similarly, the World Science Forum, which was held in November last year, the declaration that comes out of there, I'm going to quote for you, it says, "We call on the scientific community to redouble efforts to ensure the production of trusted knowledge and pragmatic solutions." The redoubling of efforts. So we've just got to do more. And this is where I want to be provocative. What does this mean? Do more. I think it means more global challenge agendas, more actionable knowledge for impact strategies, more money, more interdisciplinarity, more transdisciplinarity, better communications, better outreach and engagement with society, better international collaborations, make sure they're equitable, more open science, more training and capacity development, more diversity, inclusivity and equity, more monitoring and evaluation, more science advice and more science diplomacy. More, more, more. Is it going to make a difference? I don't know. So this is where we get to the future, and I'm almost done. So the point I want to provoke is simply, those are declarations about what we should do in the future. And actually our capacity to think the unthought, to not be constrained about what we've done in the past and what we're doing today, and allow that to influence, take those assumptions along and colonize our future with those assumptions of what has and hasn't worked in the past, which is what we tend to do. This is a field of futures literacy that I'm happy to say more about later. But it kind of narrows down our ability to be creative in imagining alternative futures. So it raises difficult questions like, what will society expect from science in 20 years' time that society is not asking of us today? I don't have the answers to this because, as I said, no one can predict the future and no one owns it. So all answers are welcome. But what will society expect from us that it doesn't expect now? And what roles will scientists need to play in the future that we either do not play now or are hopelessly unprepared to play? Our roles have changed in the last 3 decades, radically. I mean, if you think about something like transdisciplinarity, scientists are not used to being those facilitators of engagement, of co-generation of knowledge and co-production of knowledge. Which assumptions about the role of science will no longer hold in the future? And what would a science system look like if it were optimized to deliver what truly matters to people and the planet? Or put it another way, if we were designing the global science system from scratch in 2050, what would we retain from our current system and what would we leave behind? I think we have a tendency to want to bring everything with us and do, 10 years of Science Forum, so we must have another 10 years of Science Forum, right? 20 years of SALT, so there must be another 20 years of SALT. We never have we talk about sunset clauses in the international programs that the International Science Council has set up, where I can remember sitting in 2012 talking about this program will be a 10-year, it will be a decadal program. 10 years go by, no one mentions. So we never think about what we should leave behind. So I hope that opens up the conversation, Kevin. Back to you.
No, thanks very much. Let's give Heidi a hand. Was that scary? The polycrisis. Have you guys heard of this term polycrisis before? But just, we're talking about a future where, this is an informed opinion that society will collapse at some point. Now, it is something that we have to think about, and I think that your roles in this, we have to accept that we are humans and we go about our lives, but what will it take for us to be really creative about coming up with a way to handle this future, and what can science do about it? So with that, we'll go to the International Science Council to answer that big question. What's science going to do to save society?
We should go to the cape.
So Dr. Vanessa McBride, she's the current science director at the International Science Council, and acting director of the Center for Science Futures. And she used to be my colleague at the Office of Astronomy for Development. She was here in South Africa, head of research at SAO and deputy director at the office. So go for it, give us the answers.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Heide, for setting me up for failure like that. I don't think that, as Heide said, we don't have a clear vision of the future, but we do have, some of the clarity that looking at the present provides for us. And also want to challenge us to think, that all of us actually have started out with a kind of innate curiosity and creativity that we employ as scientists or as artists or as other creative industries. We've all learnt about gravity the hard way, when we've dropped food from our high chairs onto the floor and we can't retrieve it. We have all learnt about hydrodynamics by playing in streams or in pools of water. And it's that kind of simple curiosity that I think we undervalue right now, as when we look at some of these big issues, and taking a return back to really what makes all of us in the end scientists is incredibly important. But we don't just practice this the science alone, right? We practice it eventually entrenched in a system, and I think it's that system that we have to think about. As Heide said, what are the challenges? What would we leave behind? What would we change? And that system looks at things like knowledge production, review of knowledge, dissemination of that knowledge, and then moves at some point from the production of knowledge to the implementation and the application of that knowledge. And that system changes fairly slowly. But the kind of things that Heide has talked about in the world, those things are changing fast, much faster than our sort of slow scientific systems are adapting and able to keep up with them. So there's this real kind of disconnect in tempo between how we think science is serving the world and what we actually need, and what is defined as, what matters to people and the planet. And so I don't think I have any answers, but I have a couple of points that might be worth thinking about, and it would be great to hear from the audience as well, because I think you guys probably have some counter examples or counter suggestions. But we've talked a bit about mission-driven science, the idea that some of these issues that are facing us require expertise across many different sectors of society, not just from science, but also from communities, potentially from indigenous knowledge, from political or societal actors. And we find that, you know, science will make a limited contribution and then we'll go, here, I've published my paper, my work is done, implement, guys. And that leaves us a gap between, you know, knowledge generation and the implementation and the kind of conversation that we have to have as a society in order to realize the changes that potentially can be made. And again, working in the system, we have a system that doesn't incentivize that work in the gap. We have a system where funders go, we'll fund up to this point, once you've published that'll do. And then we'll have another system of funding that starts with development funders. We'll go, okay, we'll fund from here. But where's the continuity between those two systems? And again, now the system that we have within science, where we incentivize and recognize individuals, again misses that little gap. Because we say, great, you have published your paper, you get a tick in a box over here, you can move to your next stage of senior lecturer or associate professor. But if you have spent 18 months engaging with an indigenous knowledge system or your politicians in this area or the traditional leadership, oh sorry, but that doesn't actually count. Even though you may be working on societal change, those things, you know, are not recognized at the moment in the science system. So what are the things we can leave behind from the science system that we have today? And what are the new things that we want to build into the science system of tomorrow to make it work? And then, somewhat related to that point is also the kind of practices that the current science system encourages, which are really undermining the integrity of science that we do. We've talked a bit about trust, we've talked about mis and disinformation and how that polarizes societies. But yet we set up these systems of metrics and measurement that in a way encourage cheating the system. And they've spawned a whole variety of initiatives like predatory journals and paper mills that look at, you know, accumulating these kinds of metrics and little bits of value. And if we have a system where at least a good fraction of it we know to be fake or made up, how can we ask society to see us as a trusted partner? And then another challenge, I think the last one that I think I would like to raise is around how the research production has changed over the last couple of years. We've always seen industry as a key player in producing some level of research, but that has really accelerated over the last decade. And in fact, we see industry production of knowledge now in areas where we didn't see it before. Areas that were traditionally left to publicly funded science. So those are areas like maybe mathematics and statistics. And we see the value, of course, in funding these things as a public good, because we realize that we can build on this kind of curiosity-driven knowledge on these basic sciences for other broader applications. But in the last 10 years, we've seen a huge amount of that work being done within the private sector. And it doesn't always have the same set of values that we use when we do publicly funded science. And so understanding this acceleration and how we can better interact with those, I mean, I think this is a question I don't have an answer to, but I think something that we have to engage in going forward. We also see, to some extent, a significant dismantling of the public infrastructure for science. And we've seen this recently, for example, in big publicly available databases of climate science that are just no longer available These are things that we had instilled as kind of public infrastructure, and we do not, I think, in the future want to see those coming back as privately provided services at cost. So these again are areas where we have to look at this interplay between the publicly funded science, where often our mandates are to create knowledge and disseminate it as a global public good, and the private sector and what their motivations, goals are, and how we can work more efficiently across them. And so I think I'll round it up there, but just to say that, you know, we recognize that it's a choice as we're moving into this very uncertain world, and as we decide on a science system that is hopefully more agile into the future and that keeps some of these key things. And we hope that it is a science system that puts science forward as a global public good so that we can share the benefits widely.
Cool, thanks. Let's give it a hand. So I think Vanessa managed to get us to recognize a little bit the holes in science in trying to shape our future, because some of these challenges in the science system is stuff that we might need to fix before we actually look at science as a solution to society's problems as well. So think about it. Please get your questions ready. We'll start opening it up once everyone has had a chance. One of the big things in the world today, and sort of an outcome of science, one particular area of science, is artificial intelligence, and we're lucky to have, I think officially I'm required to say Her Excellency Ambassador Lavina Ramkusun. She's the AU Ambassador, 6th Region Global and ECAR, AI, Ethics and Digital Transformation. Basically, in the office, we refer to her as the person that knows everything you need to know about AI, and knows all the people. I mean, she has numbers on her phone that people will pay big money to get. With your perspectives, give us an idea how AI will affect our future, and in terms of science policy and society.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. So my phone book is not for sale. Let's just put that out there. So AI, I get to talk about the favorite child in the room at the moment. So the favorite child is obviously AI. I've been talking, living, breathing, and playing around with it for over 20 years. So I think I have some level of understanding of it from a build perspective, but also from an entire ecosystem perspective. So we've seen the evolution of technology. If we take it back in the 60s, it was something that came about. It was highly mathematical. We knew that it could, drive a great level of impact, okay, on society. But it was still just a tool for the geeks, for the scientists, right? Then we came into the era of maybe the early 2000s, and that was where we started seeing a lot more attention being driven and highlighted to artificial intelligence. We've seen things like small tweaks in the system. So use cases were, looking at it from a search engine perspective, looking at it from geospatial data and trying to tweak that to some extent. We've seen it on those type of scales. So somewhere in the background that nobody really kind of cared about until 3-4 years ago, when ChatGPT became the commercialized product or the tangible product of engaging with AI. And that's when everyone said, ooh, okay, what is this? Let's figure this out a little bit more and how it can actually impact and affect society. You were talking about some of the treaties that were signed, and so just on the AI side, we had obviously the Paris sort of declaration, or the Bechley Declaration in the UK that was signed, which came off the Paris Safety AI Summit. which really said and beckoned that, you know, we need to start looking at this piece of technology and the extent of things that it can actually do. We then now are going into a phase where it's all about impact, and India is hosting the Impact AI Summit that's coming up, and it's really looking at how does it net effect on ground. And with that, we've seen, I have the privilege of traveling, and you've heard painfully some of my stories, but maybe I'll share one or two in terms of where I've seen AI, being implemented. So we had a scenario in Morocco with the most recent floodings that happened, where AI was used from a voice recognition perspective, understanding local languages, and then from that going even further to then geolocating, and then that data being given to the ministries to then allow for dispatch, medical staff and the rest to then, go and help and save communities that are in need, to the extent that this was done by a youth, 24-year-old who just said there's a problem and there's a need and we need to fulfill it. And to date, that has now been accepted as a standard operation within the ministry itself. So I think you onto the youth somewhere. Another area was around the leaf predictions. So this was about 8 years ago. Came across a Ugandan youth, 16, that became orphaned overnight, and with that, he was left with himself and his grandmom in a farmland and didn't know exactly what to do. But he heard of this thing called AI, so he self-taught, went down a rabbit hole, did leaf predictions as well as crop harvesting for his grandmom. She enjoyed it. It alleviated some of her pressures for her, so that the rest of the community started saying, okay, let's get engaged. Let's figure out, how can we all utilize something like this. At 16, 8 years ago, this wasn't enough for him. He went to the telcos and he negotiated a zero-rate fee, for all of the farmers. So I think, the mindset and the want from a continent is definitely there. I think something that we do well is always being able to problem solve for our immediate sort of scenarios, right? What we don't do well enough at is the scalability, right? And that's where we create mass impact. And how can we actually do that? So in the phases of how AI has evolved, we've obviously gone in the last 18 months where governments have given a lot of policies and supported that from either strategies, policies, or regulations. If I had to ask the room, any guesses in terms of how many countries in Africa have either a strategy, policy, or regulation? Any guesses?
16.
16? Okay. Any others? No, come on,
Everyone's
guys.
scared to guess.
Come on.
2.
2. Okay? Anyone here on the panel? No? Okay, so we have 40 countries. Okay? 40 countries that have, in the continent, in 18 months. I think that's really, really good. Which means that they're taking AI quite seriously. We have one country that has a regulation, which is Rwanda. And they did this regulation in 2018, okay? So I know that South Africa, we're still looking at putting out an AI policy. Some of us have been, in this room, have been involved with that particular process. But I think the narrative is from a policy perspective. So one is, from the technology developing, that's happened. The next sort of conundrum was, the policy and the frameworks guiding that. And I think that's pretty much ready, and it's saying that they're there. So I think the last bit now is from a corporate perspective, from community perspectives, actually coming up with the mass impact or the mass scalabilities that's required. However, I think AI has been one of those disruptors in terms of saying that we need to really redefine what we're doing and how we're doing it. Okay, so we've traditionally been in an economy that has been a cost of capital, right? Or cost of capital. That has been how we've benchmarked ourselves. Now the new age of economy is really going into things where we start benchmarking ourselves against data, so energy and intelligence. Okay, those have become our new 3 paradigms in terms of how we position ourselves going forward. Where we will end up, or what does the future sort of look like? If we look at the last 6 months alone, we've had a rapid change in terms of just the technology. We've had some of the guys that are at the cutting edge saying, for example, AGI is really close by. Okay, some of us believe it, some of us don't. I think most of us don't, right? We've also seen from the applications, we've seen the misuse of it, and you've spoken a little bit about misinformation and disinformation. We've also seen the weaponization of AI, which has taken place, and I think that's a large topic that is going to carry forward into 2026. I think for us as a continent, we need to be able to have a bolder vision when it comes to how we want to implement it, also how we interpret it. So at the moment, we don't have a definition of AI as a continent, whereas everyone else across the globe does. And the reason for this, you may think it's really simple, but the definition kind of sets the tone for how the applications are then absorbed into those communities, societies, or even those corporates. So if you look at Asia, all of them look at it as a cognitive intelligence. And you've kind of seen that in terms of how their applications and their sort of focus areas in terms of robotics and the rest of it, autonomous cars, smart cities. So it's very much that cognitive intelligence aspect. If you look at the US, their definition has been around human-like intelligence, okay? Which goes to show, you've seen a lot of the big tech kind of really allowing and wanting to mimic it. So a lot of it has been baselined on speech recognition, computational vision. We've seen those sort of elementary ideas, and it's now evolved to the fact of, can it actually compete with us on a maths Olympiad or a science Olympiad, or is it smart enough to be a PhD student, and the likes. So I think we've kind of seen, and that's why I think it's important for us as a continent to really have a definition and start to decide how we want it to be implemented. We've always been on the receiving end, and you've spoken a little bit about geopolitics, and I think maybe later on we can delve a little bit into the geopolitics, given the fact that I'm now a technology diplomat, so I sit on both sides of the fence. He's not wrong. I can tell you great many stories, with leaving some names out. But maybe just to round up a little bit is we find ourselves in that urgency, moment of urgency is what I call it, together with a moment of realism. So we understand from a technology perspective, tech can always do anything and everything, it can solve for anything and everything. That has never been the question, I don't think. It is, however, what exactly we wanted to do, where exactly we wanted to solve those problems, where exactly do we find the value? So, those are the kind of key questions that we need to be asking ourselves. Obviously, AI safety is crucial because it is allowing for us to understand something that we don't really understand. So everyone, most people, if I asked you if you understood AI, how many of you would put your hands up? Okay, maybe one. There we go. So, there's still this confusion of the capability of AI, where can it go, what can it do, where will it end up, and, will it actually just be that extension of who we are? The net result thus far has been AI has become a citizen of the globe. That happened a few years ago. AI has become a minister. AI has become a CEO of a company and is still functioning as a CEO. So you're getting a full mixture. So AI is no longer just a software or things like that. It's actually an extension of who you are, it is becoming your co-worker, or it has already become your co-worker in your spaces. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to start really understanding how we want to redefine our position going forward, especially in the science field.
Cool. Thanks very much. I think you've made it clear why any conversation about the future has to include a conversation about AI. And it makes me wonder as well, like, if we had a fifth panelist here who was AI, what would they say? What would it say? Is they, it, him? It.
We do not genderize.
We do not genderize AI. I think you know, so far you've heard sort of big picture stuff. This is what you know, the big ideas that we need to deliberate on. But you know, when we were setting up this panel, we said, like, but what does all this mean to communities and to people sort of on the ground at the coalface? And so I must introduce you now to our fourth panelist, Wilma D'Souza. We must send apologies. Arnold, who's the CEO of the Usiko Foundation, he was supposed to be here but had a death in the family and so couldn't make it. So thanks, Wilma, for coming on short notice and standing in. Wilma's been a fundraiser for Usiko for 10 years, a capacity builder, project manager, coach, and board member. Worked in non-profit, academic, business sectors. Here she's representing Usiko, which is an NPO based in Jamestown, Stellenbosch, that works with at-risk youth and using nature and recently astronomy to impact positively on this group. So, Wilma, let us hear your perspectives about the challenges on the ground and the role of science.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Kevin, and good afternoon, everybody. So a room full of scientists is not a usual audience for me, so I'm very excited to be here and share some insights from the non-profit sector with you. So we speak of AI, new technologies and innovation, but for many communities, their critical questions are much simpler. How am I going to put food on the table? How am I going to keep my child away from joining the gangs or stop my teenage daughter from falling pregnant? Have I got enough money for transport tomorrow? Will I be safe in my own home today? There are amazing, groundbreaking new technologies, but often these are disconnected from the most vulnerable members of our society, who are just trying to survive and rarely make links between science and their everyday lives. Beyond 2030, the role of science and innovation will only be meaningful if they can translate into tangible and accessible improvements for everyday lives. The global scientific community must continue to shift from innovation for innovation's sake to innovation for inclusion, access, and equality. The children and youth that Usiko work with are curious and want to engage with science. It's not a lack of interest. The challenge is the lack of access, lack of resources, lack of understanding how science is relevant to them, together with the overwhelm of the traumas that they face. Recent research has shown that South African children growing up in townships face 8 major traumas every single year. Just think about that and the impact of that kind of trauma on a person. 2 of the high schools that we partner with, one doesn't offer pure maths as an option for matric, only maths lit. The other school lost its maths teacher for a whole year before they could recruit another. Without maths, careers in science are severely impacted. Compare this to what's happening in a country like Germany, which we were lucky enough to do an exchange visit with last year, and we were blown away to see children having access to robotics in the very early stages of their schooling. Uziko started as a community response where elders came together to find solutions to the huge challenges its youth were facing. The critical one being the high dropout rates at school. In South Africa, only 48% of those who start in grade R will make it to matric. The coloured population in the Western Cape, who are Uziko's kind of target beneficiaries, have the highest rates of school dropout. The problem Uziko is tackling is that South Africa has a lost generation. In historical and traditional societies, children and youth would be guided by their elders on values and expectations and what it means to be a contributing member of our society. That's largely been lost, except for perhaps the more negative areas in gang membership or social media. Uziko's solution is to bring back this caring community elder wisdom and guidance, and we use 3 pillars to do that. Education and life skills as after school sessions, wilderness therapy, and mentoring by elders from the same or similar communities as our beneficiaries. When I first joined the organisation, I sat with the executive director, Arnold, and I said, I don't get it, Arnold. I don't get it. Why are you taking these kids out into the wilderness when they're surrounded by wilderness? We're in Stellenbosch, in the winelands. There's mountains, there's greenery. Why do you need to take them out into wilderness, into nature? And he said to me, yes, they're surrounded by nature, but they never go into nature. That's not seen as something that's accessible to them. And so they're stuck. They're stuck not only physically in the townships and the rural farms, they're also stuck mentally. The first thing that our programs work on is to shift mindsets from the toxic beliefs around unworthiness, incapability, and very often shame. All those toxic beliefs is what's keeping them stuck. Wilderness and nature is a great healer and supports their discovery of purpose, identity, and direction. As part of our program, we've always talked about the stars and the planets around kind of campfire chats and storytelling. But in 2025, we were very privileged to be selected by OAD as a recipient of a grant, which has allowed us to have a more dedicated focus using astronomy in our Wilderness Rites of Passage program. We are so proud that we are the only South African organisation that's been selected this year. And we're one of only a handful in the whole history of OAD's grant giving to not be astronomers or scientists ourselves. We are community grassroots, purely grassroots, bottom-up solution, community entrenched. And we are celebrating 25 years in existence next year. Our programs with at-risk youth are changing the trajectory of their lives. The OAD grant has enabled us to start astronomy clubs, have dedicated astronomy sessions at our camps, and we've also taken 2 groups, one from Stellenbosch in the Western Cape and the other from Branfley in the Northern Cape, to the SALT telescope in Sutherland. They were so excited to learn that South Africa is a global leader in this science. They had no idea about that. We also introduced the youth to indigenous stories and perspectives of our place in the universe. This instills a sense of their own ancestral history and identity. We've discovered that there's a movement to rename the moon phases for the southern hemisphere. It's a move away from the more Western-centric narratives. Some of our insights that we would like to share is that science and astronomy is simply not on the radar of people living in survival mode. But once you ignite a spark, allow them to experience and link the science to their lives, they are enormously curious. One 13-year-old girl who's in our program, who was deliberately kept out of school for most of her life and only started recently, was extremely quiet and shy, ashamed and unsure of herself amongst her peers. She joined the astronomy club and has blossomed and grown in confidence, so much so that she's now taking a leadership role in the club. Linking science to their lives doesn't have to be fancy, no equipment even necessary. We just get them to draw pictures, lie on the ground, and just watch the skies. You can't make assumptions that they've ever done that before, that they even know anything. When we did sessions with our staff and board, we discovered that even they didn't have knowledge and experience that we assumed that they might. By simply lying down and looking, we were able to take the children into how science works at a universal level, how the moon phases connects to the earth and water, and how it all connects to their inner self and outer self, and how human beings' mental health is supported by this connection. For the youth we work with, this was science on another level, an experiential level outside of the classroom, bringing playfulness and fun and connection. Playfulness and fun may not seem important when talking about science, but children living in poverty are often carrying heavy adult burdens and responsibilities. They are learning in dilapidated classrooms with an average of 50 kids to one teacher. Their teachers are overwhelmed and burdened, and so playfulness and allowing them to just be children in safe spaces in the beauty of nature allows them a way into engaging with complex ideas on another level. So for the global scientific community, what is the role you can play to ensure inclusion, access and equality? I suggest firstly, meeting communities where they're at. Consult and co-create with them. Solutions can't be parachuted in from faraway labs and ivory towers. This disconnection keeps the barriers in place. Scientific innovations can and could be designed with local voices, local knowledge, and local leaders. Secondly, there has to be investment and innovative ways to educate the most vulnerable members of our society that supports human dignity and access. Thirdly, build local capacity. The future of science in Africa and many parts of the world depends on nurturing grassroots innovators, young people who understand their communities and can adapt global knowledge to local realities. Finally, we must measure success differently, not just in terms of citations and impact factors, but in terms of community outcomes, improved health, food security, education, access and resilience. In closing, I would like to share what one young learner told us. I never thought I would see galaxies with my own eyes. It makes me feel like anything is possible. This is the essence of science beyond 2030, not only grounded in the realities of survival, but also a source of hope, imagination, and connection. As scientists, innovators, and leaders, remember that the future being shaped is not just about technology, it's about possibility. The true role of science is not only to solve problems, but to inspire dreams. And when those dreams are nurtured at the grassroots, they have the power to transform societies. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was a really cool way to now throw it out to the audience. We've gone through sort of a lot of stuff from very big picture to looking at the challenges we face in science. But I'd like to throw it out now to the audience very quickly. Any comments, questions, suggestions?
So I've got two questions to Ms. Vilma. The question that I had for you, especially when we consider aspects of inclusivity and access, we have a crisis in the country in terms of children with disabilities. That's both physical and cognitive impairments that get left behind. And I was wondering, in terms of your program, do you look at including them, and especially in impoverished areas where they literally, kept in the house. They're not attending school, they're kept in the house, and they're generally left behind. So I was just wondering about that aspect. And then to Ambassador, the question that I had for you, so just on clarity on the number of countries with strategies and policies, what is the authoritative source for that? Because some put it at a lower and say the rest are in development. So that's the one question. And the second one is there any kind of effort that looks at ensuring that there is some kind of coherence? So as the various countries on the continent are developing their own strategies, we need some mechanism, especially as scientists, where some of the areas that we're working on are transboundary. So we've seen that problem in the healthcare space, where we are limited in terms of the collaboration, and specifically if you're looking for data from other countries, because of the regulations that are more on the touching on data privacy specifically. So is there an effort specifically from the AU that looks to remove impediments to collaboration across the continent once each and every country has its strategy in place?
Cool, thanks. Let's take a few more hands and then we can give it back to the panel.
Hello, my name is Priscilla Malloy, and I am the founder of UMCO AI, which is the only offline government AI model in the world. We create AI solutions for the people in the government of South Africa, 100% offline, solutions that don't require data, Wi-Fi, and they work during load shedding. And I'm, along with that, the co-founder of the Women's Journal of International Relations, which is probably why I'm opening up this question surrounding inclusivity. We are asking the question about what will shape the future regarding AI, science, innovation, geopolitics, and technology. Yet we're not considering that so many students write papers that have the answers to these questions. I mean, as a political science student, I've probably written hundreds of papers that stay dormant in my professor's drives, right? So essentially, I think only 1 to 5% of student papers are actually published. So my question is, why do we maintain such high barriers to academic publishing, and what will it take to open up access to students, especially in low-income communities, that understand what's happening within the communities, like you were saying, at a grassroots level, that can actually solve some of these questions that we have. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Other hands?
I'd like to greet you all. For the lady who runs Cisco or part of the program, I have a very specific question here. They could give us more attention. The idea of 40 children to 1 teacher is normal in our middle class community, but we're so overlooked that we start lacking opportunities that could make our lives much easier, help many people, and yet because we are overlooked, what is the purpose of focusing on lower community, rural areas and kids from rural communities when those in the middle class in schools where these opportunities aren't offered to us, we are very overlooked by these programs.
Cool, thanks. One last hand. I saw there was one last one, then we'll throw it back to the panel.
I think my question just general to the panel is, who do we do science for? And maybe that's a question that we should really ask ourselves, because you publish big journals, you do research, you study the stars. Of course, the curiosity of knowing about what's happening out there in the universe. It's all good and great, but you look at your neighbor, someone. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, for example. Just a wall divides the rich from the very poor. So if the science that someone, I was thinking this morning that the thing that separates, those that are able to do, to go and have a lot of successful careers are the initial conditions. You only find a very few people that had, difficult initial conditions actually making it. But if you can reach a point where even the person that has the worst of initial conditions can be able to actually make it, to be able to control.
You guys want to pick up the mic there in the panel? Who would like to go first? And the quicker you answer, the more questions we can take.
Does it take your time?
So there was a couple of questions directly for me, so I'll go first. So the inclusion of children with disabilities. So we partner with schools, and so the children who are coming on our Rites of Passage program are from the schools. So the schools that we work with don't tend to have very many disabled children. So we haven't had that many actually on the program, but we do have another program with where we have a skills centre where anyone from the community can come and use computers and have access to online training and do workshops on CV writing, things like that. And there we do have quite a few disabled people who will come and use the facilities. We can absolutely work with disabled children, but it would be in partnership with the school. So if the school was to recommend, then we would include them definitely. And then
on the question of 40 kids per class.
yes. So I'm not quite sure what you were asking. So can I just clarify? So you were saying in more affluent schools, you also have 40 children to a class with one teacher, or is there an assistant in there? With one teacher, yeah. So we would absolutely work with more affluent schools as well. We have partnered with organisations to deliver our kind of wilderness therapy part to different institutions and schools, but it's mainly around funding. So our funders are supporting the schools that we have partnerships at the moment. So we're always getting requests from other schools to come and work with them, but we don't have the funding capacity to really expand on that just yet.
Okay, but these are sort of examples which maybe others can take up for different schools as well. Remember, this is one NGO in a big country, so these ideas can be spread. Can I suggest that Ambassador Lavina takes the question about that, and then Vanessa takes the question about papers that stay in people's cupboards, and Heidi takes the question about who do we do science for?
Okay, so I appreciate your question and thank you very much for that. So firstly, the source is from the AU. I co-chair something called ASTRIC, which is the Science, Technology, Research, Innovation Council within the African Union. And our stats is a combination of those countries that have a dedicated AI strategy. We've also seen some of them that have taken existing ICT policies together with either a data policy that they may have or even a copyright or IP law, and they've tweaked that to include some form of AI into it because they are either too small from a GDP perspective or they don't feel that they require a specific dedicated AI strategy for their country. And others have taken their existing digital transformation plans and policies and included some parts of that into that. So it's a combination of all of that we've seen. We've also, I was part and privy to putting together the first AI continental policy that was back in 2018. And since then been involved with all of that, so have an oversight view in terms of that. Your question around the integration and the overlaps in particular. So within the African Union, we have various different commissions. One which I report into is the Science Technology, or ESTI. Then we have the implementation arm, we have the governance arm, we have the human rights arm. So there's many various aspects of that. And we've already kick-started initiatives within the African Union in terms of finding out where the synergies lie from a project's perspective. We also have gone ahead and created working groups as an example. So those working groups, at the moment we have one in semiconductors as an example, where we're looking at computation and the idea around every country having a data center or not, versus us having to optimize the mines and the raw materials that are there to create an environment around the semiconductors and that sort of environment. So I think there is some initiatives. Can we do it better? For sure. Can we be more cohesive in terms of our approach? Absolutely. So welcome any further ideas if you do have them.
Cool, thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks. I think it's a big question about barriers to publishing work. It's part of the issues around quality. Is this thing on? I don't know. And I don't think there's huge immediate solutions that are entrenched, but there are some interesting developments happening at the moment where there are kind of open community-driven publication platforms where you don't need to always wait for acceptance of a paper by a big journal, which doesn't happen because they don't recognize your name on the thing, or you're facing a whole bunch of conscious or unconscious biases. So there are some of these. I think one of them, for example, is called Octopus, where you can put your publications on. They're open to peer review to the whole world, so anyone can go up on the platform and sort of comment on it. I think we're still some way of finding the balance between sort of rigorous peer review and overwhelming these kinds of initiatives with submissions. But it would be quite interesting to chat more about possible ideas of how to facilitate those practices.
Yeah, I think those are the conversations that yeah, maybe I should. Let me take Ulma's. You can get it. I think those are the conversations that we need to have, because, when Vanessa spoke in the opening as well, it was about the way we do science, and if there's things that we need to change, how do we get those into the system? And these are the people that will change the system. and yourselves. Who do we do science for, Heidi?
May I just
Yeah,
add
go for
to
it. Go for
the
it, go
issue
for it.
of the barriers to publishing? I mean, I think the point that if we do a deep dive there, it is about what distinguishes scientific knowledge from other forms of knowledge, and the issue of review, that we are open to being criticized by our peers, is what we claim makes scientific knowledge the most trusted form of knowledge. So, and then it makes me think of AI. If you have all these papers online, that's data for AI, right? And that increases potentially the possibility of students and scientists who used ChatGPT to write their papers producing lower quality, less trusted knowledge. These are all connected issues. So who do we do science for? Wilma's story.
Trust Dr. Charles to ask the tough questions.
Wilma's story just makes me think, there's something around we need to rehumanize science. I think, Charles, your question raises for me the issue of how we understand in our current science system, how we understand the issue of impact. And it's so commercialized, it's so technical. We often, I think, forget about other forms of impact that affect, individual human lives on a day-to-day basis. So who do we do science for? There should be multiple answers to that. There should be multiple audiences for that. I remember, I've always been one, I want to change the world, but I remember friends and colleagues saying to me, I didn't become a scientist to change the world, not my responsibility, and that should be okay. But we have a system that makes it less okay.
Right.
And yet the impact that those people can have on, real world problems and people's lives can be enormous. I think the question we need to ask ourselves about the future is who currently holds the power to determine the kind of science that is done, by whom and for what, for whom, and who should hold that power in future.
I just want to add to the other two questions. One was obviously around the student sort of ratio, the 1 to 40 sort of dynamic. So just to give you guys an example, in Asia you have literally 1 teacher to 1,000 students because they are digitally enabled. Okay, and then you have the US, which is going towards a very personalized education where every kid will have an AI tutor. So, the dynamic is not always as bleak as we think it is, right? So I just wanted to add that from a tech perspective, just to give us an idea of where exactly we want to position ourselves as we go into this narrative. The other was around your question for a journal. And I think you have people that are here. You have DSTI, you have the likes of AU, you have the likes of a few others, and my sort of suggestion is, besides having an AI critique all our work and our papers, let us have an open journal, or let's create a network between all of the different universities where when you publish a paper, it's also available publicly within that network, right? Like, these are very simple things that can actually be done. I don't know if you've engaged with USAF. USAF is the association for the universities. So they have, I think, about 27 universities under them, specifically for South Africa. And it's definitely an area that they would be happy to go down as well.
Cool, thanks. Let's have another round. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions from the audience? We went through some pretty big ideas in a pretty short time.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is JP Kumalo. My background is in astrophysics and obviously physics and maths, and such why I came to this event. And first I'd like to thank the panel specifically for speaking something that's unfamiliar to me in my field. Rather speaking on the pluriform, interdisciplinary, anti-capitalist, liberal, equitable, and socially engaged and socially grounded approach to physics, science for society. And then one of the things that I think it was Prof. Haida, if I'm saying it correctly, Haida? Yeah, Haida, the last one, yeah, Prof. Haida. What Prof. Haida was saying rather on shifting from open science, the issue that was in my mind, and as well as what you sort of said, the shift from open science to some of the points that I was hearing actually in a few of these talks throughout the whole forum these past few days. The shift from open science to more of a commercialization or a capitalization of science, as well as Her Excellency, as well speaking specifically on the use of AI, unfortunately, depending on who has power and access to what. I want to say a scenario or a case that happened on Twitter or X, as it's called. Okay, I'm gonna say it on a public platform. The scenario of there was something called Grok, which is an AI for Twitter, the Mecha Hitler scenario, as well as the propagation of propagation of propaganda on white South African genocide. So these are all the worries that obviously anyone can have when we think of AI. And who is AI for, and who is science for? Question there at the back. So one of the questions that I had for Prof. Haida was then, you said a point which is a way on looking how to reconstruct science from 2015 onwards. Then I was thinking to myself, why 2015 exactly? Why that number? Why that date?
Okay, thanks. Any other comments, questions? We're gonna start rounding up, so last chance you get it in. I know you probably have something in your mind, you want to say it, maybe you're nervous, now's your chance. Going once, going?
Good afternoon, everyone. My question is for Her Excellency Ambassador Lavina. So when I look at AI beyond 2030, I see where it creates a winners take more economy, where it creates or widens the gap between high-skilled workers and lower-skilled workers. For example, the white-collar jobs, where you see data analysts and data scientists engage in machine learning, and they're getting upskilled even more, while the lower-skilled workers are getting left behind, creating more structural unemployment, inequality, and so forth. So what is, in the mission of getting AI for the future, what is the AU, or is it looking at addressing those issues, or what's the dynamic?
Cool, thanks. And I saw one more hand. Is there any more hands? Last chance? Okay, this is the last hand there.
Good morning. So my question is so sometimes I'll go and read online, and I'll see articles saying that AI is gonna take jobs, AI is gonna replace people and stuff like that. So, and some people will say that AI is not gonna take jobs, AI is gonna create other jobs in the future, create more important jobs in the future that we need to focus on and stuff like that. So I just want to know, what opportunities is AI going to create? Is AI really going to create more jobs or better jobs, or is it going to take jobs from people? So I just want to understand that.
Cool, thanks very much. You got some mics? Or you can use this one. So how do you want to do the
Why
2050?
why 2050? Because I hope to still be alive. But there is a serious answer to your question, and I'm going to keep it very short. It is about our capacity to anticipate the future. It's easier for us to think about tomorrow. Is it going to rain? I'm going to prepare for, am I going to be hungry tomorrow? We can kind of think about tomorrow next week. When we do our strategic plans for institutions, we typically do 3 to 5 years. Most of us, I think, if we're honest, would say, if you look back on your strategy, you think, was that a worthwhile exercise? But as the time extends, our capacity to anticipate the future becomes more and more difficult. So really thinking that those unthought thoughts, thinking the unthinkable, 2050 people use as a kind of, things could be so radically different there. It's a way of opening up our anticipatory capacity. There's a lot more to be said about that, but this is the work of futures literacy, which UNESCO advocates, and which I think the ISC, if I may be so bold, could really do an interesting futures literacy series on the future of science globally.
Cool, thanks. If you can take the last question, and then we'll give each of you like 30 seconds final thoughts.
Yeah.
We'll start from that.
Awesome, thank you. So just on the what more can be done, I think from a UN perspective, they just recently put out a call for a science AI panel. That's so, from a global perspective, I think there's a large sort of positioning and narrative on sciences. So you guys are the next big thing. To your question, and to the gentleman in the back, I think I'm just going to combine those questions. And there is no conference or meeting or gathering where that question around jobs is never asked. So I appreciate it because it is a very topical thing. It is also a very sensitive issue. We obviously have the ideas of two very large splitting views when it comes to AI. It is the era of abundance versus it's the era of doomsday scenario, right? And with that, it obviously starts to, delve into what we call allowing for the larger gaps to sort of become more magnified, right? So with that, you have things like digital dignity becoming quite a large issue because you're having the disparity of economies, you're having the disparities amongst social gatherings, you're having the disparity on a healthcare front. So, to your point, yes, there is a lot that is happening at the high end purely because of access to resources and, their vision in terms of where they want to see it. On the, sort of other hand, we have, AI, which is taking an approach, or people that have created it has taken an approach where it could do the menial tasks, right? So from vacuuming to, chopping up your food or preparing your food to being your butler or assistant or, just your sort of digital twin, it's all there in terms of its capabilities, right? But again, I think I'm gonna really hone back into what a country or a continent wants it to achieve for itself. Because as much as we know that it is starting to create those larger barriers. So for example, connectivity should be a human right, as an example. But if you have connectivity to every individual out there, just pause and think for a moment, right? What does that mean? Are they well equipped to understand, if they receive a deep fake message? The answer is probably not, right? So there's a lot more that's actually required, and I think we need to be super aggressive in this day and age, right, around it. We, from an AU perspective, we've just put out the second phase of our STISTA sort of plan, which is science, technology, and innovation agenda. And we had the first phase over the last 10 years, and now we're looking at the next 10 years. And on that, it is really around the integration and that interoperability layer. It's around repositioning, financing, and rethinking of exactly how and where that should end up. It is also working towards achieving the Agenda 2063 goals, which is really uplifting every person on the continent. And that is from an economic perspective, from a social aspect, from a political aspect, so it is sort of driving towards a larger narrative, and and I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more during the conference around this particular C-Star plan of 2034. Ourselves as ASRIC, as well as the Outer NEPAD team, is who you can blame for it. But in terms of job losses, I just want to give us a moment of realism, because you know, that's pretty much what I like to do. Just in the quarter of this year, the first quarter of 2025, we had over 150,000 jobs lost to AI, and this was in the US alone. Okay, and this was because there was a rise in what we call agentic AI, and this is where, you know, you're gonna have a future scenario where you talk to your AI and you say, hey, can you book me a ticket to come to the Science Forum Week? Can you transfer, you know, X amount to Kevin? No bribery. You know, can you go ahead and, you know, book me an appointment, as an example. So it's something that's going to be super ingrained and have super access to all of your stuff, right? This is where we call, or sort of dive into things like modularized AI, right? And with that is where, you know, the sort of ethical sort of conundrums are starting to play a larger net effect. And this is where I always go back. Are we asking ourselves the right question in terms of the use cases? So for example, is saving a language the correct use case? No, it's not. Okay, it should be a natural outcome of a use case. Okay, like very different ways of defining where we need to be. And the reason why I say this is because we're in the, you know, 2025, 2026, and we're still having to remind ourselves of being ethical, of knowing what is right and wrong, guys. You know, so, you know, maybe I'll just stop there, and I'll hand over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks very much. So let's just get final thoughts, 30 seconds, round up what message you want to leave everyone with. We've spoken about a lot of stuff. Go for it.
So I think it's
Use that.
I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed by some doom and gloom messages and the worries and uncertainties about the future. But an organisation like Uziko Stellenbosch is a perfect example of the hope that is actually sitting right there at grassroots level. People who deeply care about each other, deeply care about you know, instilling values and making sure that you know, people are okay. And you know, we're just one example. I'm sure there's many, many, many out there. So while the overwhelm is one reality, it's not the only reality.
Thanks very much. Let's give each one a hand.
So my point would just be to thank OAD for, you know, having a session on this topic of the future. And so my point there is to say these conversations about the future are critically important. And we know so little about how we think about the future. We are not futures literate. And so unpacking our assumptions, we tend to colonize the future with our assumptions about the current, about our situations today. And if you don't, you know, science is about the future, especially if we want science to solve societal problems. And if I don't know what your assumptions are, and you don't know what my assumptions are, we're both colonizing a future that we think we share a common vision of, but actually we don't. So these serious conversations about the future, which we use every day, are critically important. Do more. Redouble your efforts, Kevin.
Well, that's a message to all of you guys. Thanks very much.
I think I just wanted to reconnect with Wilma's point actually about the playfulness and the curiosity that has inspired us all. And if we can take that kind of creativity and perspective forward to imagining the future. You know, we've pointed out a whole bunch of systems that have got holes in them. But the systems only work because we follow them, right? And so we have to realize that to some extent the power is in our hands to make those changes.
So as we find ourselves more and more in the sort of balance between man and machine and figuring out where we are, I myself have been faced with a couple of questions, like you, which is, do I actually want to live longer? And if so, can I? You know, the idea of wanting to be around for a longer period of time is one that is enticing, but what exactly are we going to do with it becomes the next sort of you know, question to that. So yeah, do I want to be a cyborg? Of course, it's cool. But you know, if we are talking about the seriousness of it, right, and the ethical issues, you know, from a biological standpoint, is it okay to have a nanobot floating inside me, having to solve and understand all of this information about who I am? Is it okay for me as a digital citizen to have more and more knowledge and more power to understanding myself in any given environment? And those are the sort of things that we've got to start really asking ourselves. What is that future definition that we want for ourselves, right? Is it that sci-fi one? Is it the Star Trek? Is it the Star Wars, right? So which end of the spectrum are we actually going to go into? I think I just want to add in on the job sort of narrative, because I think the question was really around what type of future jobs there would be. And things like AI psychologists are becoming a thing where you sit and you actually observe how AI is functioning and behaving, right? Looking at more the human connection, you know, which is something that the panel has unanimously, you know, concurred on. Those are the areas that one should be going into, not necessarily, you know, competing with AI on the fronts of coding or competing with it on, you know, mathematics, or, you know, use it for the ideas of that interdisciplinary. So for example, can you put into ChatGPT or, you know, any of the other AI platforms, you know, I want to take, you know, a certain math theorem together with, you know, something in biology together with something in physics and, you know, and astronomy, and mash it, you know, to kind of give me an idea if there is something that I could play with, you know, given my context and given my knowledge, as examples. So you have this nanosecond, you know, to make a choice and to make a difference, and that's what I'll part with.
Thanks very much. So Science Forum is meant to ignite conversations. Please, it's in your hands. Have these conversations. Speak to our panelists after. Speak to your colleagues. Have these conversations within your environment. We need to think of the future. We need to think of the unthinkable, and I like this idea of don't colonize the future with the ideas of the present. So thank you very much, everyone. Let's release them with a round of applause. Thank you so much.